was like, you know what? I should really go and find what the best young earth creationist arguments are, just so that I know them, right? Because it's niggling in my brain. Ken Ham is the most popular, so I'll order all his books. And as I'm reading them, I'm like, oh no, these answers are terrible.
Between belief and unbelief, faith and doubt, certainty and uncertainty, there is space. Each of us is thrown into this place to love, to ache, to rage, to heal, and to experience the wonder and the mystery of being. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to The Wonder and the Mystery of Being. This is episode 13, lucky 13, and it's called Dinosaurs Destroyed My Faith. So I have to admit, that's a bit of a clickbaity title, but it is relevant, I promise you. The whole clickbaity thing, my friend Conrad is the master of that. He has a podcast called Ideas Digest. He's one of my Aussie friends, so he says clickbait. I can't even do the Aussie accent properly. But anyway, whenever I hear the word clickbait, I hear it in his accent. So Conrad, I love you. Thank you for being the master of clickbait. But I don't have a super long intro for you guys today. Some of you might be relieved to hear that. My conversation today is with someone who goes by Paulogia on YouTube. His name is Paul, and he grew up Christian like me and probably like a lot of you, and came to sort of really begin to doubt his faith through a number of things he learned. Dinosaurs are involved. And so Paul has a really fascinating story on how he went from a dedicated Christian to now someone who makes videos on YouTube sort of countering and analyzing the claims of Christian theologians, apologists, and in general, just Christian thought. Now, the videos that Paul makes himself are extremely well thought out. They're very well researched, and he puts a ton of time into organizing them and putting them together. According to him, he's a bit more comfortable in a scripted setting than sort of an unscripted conversation. So I enjoyed pulling him into a totally reckless and unscripted conversation with me. So over the course of about an hour, we cover a lot of topics, and some of these topics are issues that he has made videos about that are very, very thoughtful. And so I would just encourage you to check the show notes and check the YouTube description for links to some of these videos. Also, just check out his channel in general. If you're someone who is sort of going through a deconstruction of your faith and you're sort of wondering about some other perspectives on maybe things you grew up hearing and you're starting to doubt, Paulogia is a pretty good place to just see another side of things. I think Paul and I agree on a lot, and some of the things that we have found ourselves unable to believe anymore are things we have in common. Toward the end of the conversation, we explore a couple areas in which we might have differences of opinion or sort of different views, and I enjoyed making Paul squirm a little bit in those moments too. So I'm super grateful that Paul was willing to let me rope him into this conversation, which was probably a little more scattered than he's used to, but I think it has a lot of things that you all can kind of grab onto, and if your curiosity is piqued by any of the issues that we talk about, literally just check out his channel to learn more. So that's all I'll say for now. Please enjoy this conversation with Paulogia. Paul, thank you so much for joining me today, man. I am always thrilled to speak with a fellow Canadian. I'm from Canada originally, like Vancouver originally, and then sort of the Toronto area. I know you mentioned you've lived in the Bay Area in California, where I live now, but where do you live now, and where are you from originally?
So I grew up in Saskatchewan.
In the prairies.
In the prairies in the Saskatoon area. Then I lived in the Bay Area in Marin County for 7 years. And then I'm back now I'm in Calgary, which is...
Oh, you're in Calgary.
Again, in the prairies.
Yeah.
I'm in Canada's Texas, what is what I call Alberta.
Yeah. I think sometimes most Americans don't realize that, like, Canadians, we have our own cowboys. Like,
oh yeah. This whole town shuts down 2 weeks a year when there's not COVID.
Yeah.
I call it Halloween with one costume. The whole town dresses up as a cowboy for 2 weeks. And have a huge rodeo. So that's one side. I'm not a fan of the country music.
Yeah.
So when I moved to California, I thought I was going to be free of it.
Right. And then you ended up back in Calgary.
Exactly.
Yeah. I was not big on country when I lived in Canada, but then I moved to Tennessee. I lived in Nashville for 10 or so years. And
makes sense for a recording artist.
Yeah. And I mean, some people know this, some people don't, but like Christian music is actually very centered in Nashville along with country music. So, or at least in the US it is, which I guess is really the only place in the world where Christian music has an entire sort of machine of industry built around it, as far as I know.
Right. Yeah. You don't hear a lot about Scandinavian CCM artists.
Yeah. They might have their like Nordic polytheist music industry.
Yeah.
It's pretty niche.
Yeah.
But I'm excited to talk to you today because your work has really fascinated me for a while for a number of reasons. You grew up, came up Christian like I did. And at some point you started questioning your faith and the things that you had believed and been told.
Yep.
I resonated with that. Your approach in what you do now on your YouTube channel to me is unique on a couple of levels. First, you've got a background in graphic art, and so you brought that to bear, right? And you draw yourself and animate yourself.
I do. All those things are true so far.
Yeah. Stop me when I say, I'll just keep going until I say something false. But also the other thing I've noticed is you make videos specifically countering the claims of Christians. And my impression of your approach is that it's always very measured and thoughtful and researched and in non-sensationalist. Like I never get the sense from your work that you're out to like destroy someone, like Ben Shapiro destroys,
right.
But or even like I've never heard you use the word debunked, like that kind of thing.
No.
My impression of your work is always like, hey, here's what so-and-so is saying. Let's actually take a look at that and take that seriously. Let's not just mock it. Let's take a look at it and see how it stands up. And very often, some of the issues that you deal with and take a look at doesn't seem like the claims of some of these apologists stand up to scrutiny the way that you approach it. And so
right.
Yeah, so maybe.
So let me talk about that for a
Yes,
second.
I was going to say, I'm sorry, there's no question in there.
That's quite all right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to leave the graphics. We'll maybe come back to the graphics thing if we care. Mm-hmm. But let's talk about, so my channel, at the time when I started my YouTube channel, I was recently deconverted, as you mentioned. I was recently split from my family. And I was fighting cancer at the time.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And at one point, I'd been given only 4 weeks to live, in fact, at one point.
Whoa.
So all of that said, I have 3 children who are theists. And they still are today. And in my head, I knew that at that point in time, they weren't willing to have, and they still aren't, to have these spiritual conversations with me. So my thought was, well, I need a way to put out, in case I'm not around.
Yeah.
I need a way to put out messages for my kids. One of the ways in which to do that, I thought, was YouTube as a tome, a place to put content that could speak to them should I pass, if they ever choose in some time in the future. I know it's all depressing and sad.
No, I actually had no idea.
I'm several years clear.
I had no idea about this aspect of your story.
But so my target audience, and like, it's cool that you as a non-Christian person likes to watch my channel sometimes. That's great if people do. But I'm very clear when I make videos that I'm making videos almost all the time. I've made a couple of cheeky ones. But almost all the time, my audience is who I was 5 years ago.
Right.
Would I, as a Christian, have watched this and possibly given it a chance to listen to it? So I can't, therefore, curse in the video, right? Because, as a Christian, as soon as you hear the F word, everything that happens after that,
you're gonna dismiss it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I need to take completely seriously what I took seriously at the time. And I think that is an advantage that some people like us have in communicating with Christians, is that it's still fresh in our mind to remember what it was like. And so that is my YouTube experts, when they talk about growing a YouTube channel, whatever, they're always like pinpoint, imagine one person who is the ideal person to watch your video. For me, that is me, who I was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And so that colors really my tone and how seriously I take things, because I took things very seriously when I was a Christian. So if I'm pleased to hear what you said, because it rings true with my actual intent, which is to speak to myself.
That's really interesting. That reminds me of a precept that I learned. So I was in a Christian band for 15 years.
I'm aware.
Yeah, the first 8 years I was the guitar player, then I became the lead singer. Totally transitioned my role and also the style of the band. I had to learn how to be a front man, which is for me, it was a learned skill and not one that just came naturally. And one of the precepts that I learned was basically like, if you can engage the person in the back row, you'll get everyone in front of them. And that was what you just said reminded me of that. It's like, pick your person. Am I engaging this person? And you'll gather a bunch of other people along the way. That's a really good way of thinking about it.
Which is why I'm so excited when new people start YouTube channels, because the person that I was is not the same person that a non-binary person is, or that that I got all the voices, or even, okay, I'm a white Mennonite dude. Fine, there are other white Mennonite dudes who have different takes as well. So I love when there's lots of voices, because so frankly, there is a place for the sarcastic foul-mouthed person. I think there's totally a place for that, because that will reach. George Carlin reached a lot of people.
Yeah. Some people some people in a specific time in their life, they need Christopher Hitchens.
Absolutely. Yeah. So in no way am I saying that my approach is a correct way. It's just what I've chosen to do, and it fills a little niche. So
and it also feels in character for you, even speaking to you now. I think that's one of the things.
Canadian prairie boys sometimes. We're polite. We say sorry when we bump into someone. Yeah, that's the way that goes.
Right. I mean, that's one of the things that I learned too in the music thing, is that like, you see other people, you're inspired by them. Sometimes there's a level of imitation that sometimes is helpful to get you off the ground, but your best work will be done when you're operating most closely in your sort of your nature, or whatever version of that there is.
Right.
And so I appreciate all of that stuff. I've seen recently you've had a few back and forths with specific apologists who have, because at some point you started addressing claims of Christians or maybe apologists that you've seen online, and at some point they started noticing you.
Yes, that happened. Strangely, much to my surprise, frankly. I never anticipated such a thing, but yeah.
And so recently I've seen there's been a few back and forths with, with Capturing Christianity, Cameron Bertuzzi, and Dr. Loke, who I'm not familiar with, but I am familiar with Cameron.
Yeah, and before that, I was pleased to have been noted by the Young Earth Creationist Trinity of Eric Hovind, Kent Hovind, and Ken Ham. All were the first to kind of notice me.
Yeah.
So we have that group of young Earth apologists. I've been back and forth with William Lane Craig before that.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
I've had quite lengthy discussions with Sean McDowell, who's a friend of yours. And yes, most recently this morning, Mike Licona and Gary Habermas, who are New Testament scholarships, went through one of my calls on the atheist experience in excruciating detail. So
how did that go?
It's bizarre to me. They didn't like me, strangely enough. Part of my deal is that I'm not as comfortable live as I am doing scripted work, especially when it involves research.
Yeah, I get that.
I do. And so instead of live streams, I do scripted videos. That's one of my things, because I want to be precise and accurate. I also have ADD, so I want it to be short. That's just a thing.
Yeah.
But weirdly, they didn't take one of my scripted videos to critique it. They took where I was a host on the Atheist Experience and my live critique, which is fine because I actually, I said Galatians instead of 2 Corinthians at one point, which I'm like, why did I do that? And I gave the wrong.
Classic mistake, Paul.
I know, right? Yes. They didn't disagree that I quoted the verse correctly. They just didn't like that I got the reference wrong, which as a former Bible quizzer, I would have got that wrong.
Oh, I'm brutal at that. Like I'll all the time say in a conversation, like, sometimes I don't do debates, like actual debates, because I'm not a scholar. Like that's just not my. But I do conversations, and I'm fine doing conversations with someone who disagrees with me, and that's fine. But sometimes I'll say something like, "Oh yeah, well this verse such and such a," and I'll be like, "I know it's in there, and I don't know where exactly." But like, and then if I'm having a conversation with someone like Sean McDowell, who you mentioned, like Sean will rattle off, "Oh yeah, Mark, Mark 4 verse 10 or something like that," and I'll be like, "Thanks." Yep. But so I mean, they kind of, it was weird because they like it felt to me, and I'm a little fresh off of it, so I'll probably make a response video to see what they say. Yeah. Fresh off of hearing it, my take was that they seem to focus on some very minute points rather than addressing the main thesis. Right.
And so I think when I do a response, it'll probably be that. But no, so it's been, look, I'm honored that these people who have spent their whole lives studying this stuff, and I respect that like crazy. Yeah. Like they've spent their whole lives studying this stuff, not Cameron, but everyone else. Sure. And Cameron would agree. Cameron's not a scholar.
Yeah.
He's a
photographer. I think I've heard him say that. So I don't think
his stuff's beautiful. But in fairness, like all these other people,
yep.
I'm flattered that I am addressing points that they consider to be worthy of addressing. And even though I may bristle a little bit, I think we all do when it's the personal details.
Oh, of course, yeah.
I'm honored that they think that my points are worth addressing.
Yeah.
In some context. When I was a Christian, a phrase I often used as a youth leader was like, if the devil's not challenging you, then you're not doing anything. Right.
Yeah.
And actually, I kind of feel like it's this reverse now. Oh, now that I'm the devil, now that I'm the bad one, it is maybe a sign that I'm being effective.
Yeah.
That I'm worth talking
you have enough people listening to you,
right?
That it's worth addressing. I mean, the elephant in the room, as it were, it's a really horrible usage of that term in this case, but yeah.
And obviously influence doesn't mean correctness, like in no way, like, and I get that.
I think we have all seen lots of examples of that in the last number of years. So
to whatever extent I'm influential, I'm not in any place saying that makes me correct,
sure.
But I'm just pleased that back and forth with people who you're wanting to engage with is gratifying.
Yeah. So, well, let's go back to when you were a believer. Would you mind sharing maybe a few of the specific things that caught your attention that made you go, "Oh, wait, I don't know that I believe it. That doesn't make sense to me," or maybe like specific issues? Because I know I have a few. I would be curious. Yeah. I would be curious what things stuck out for you that caused you to relook at your beliefs in the way that you have.
And I actually put out a video this morning. I'm not sure when this will air, but this morning I put out a video where currently Ken Ham and William Lane Craig are debating each other online. And I edited all that together to make it one concise, so you can see the whole debate. But frankly, it's the two sides of this coin that were what made me fall apart. So there's relevance to it. And that's why I put this video
Sure.
out. So
yeah. I'll link to that specific video.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so people can watch it.
So between my career in the film industry and where I am now, I spent some time I owned a comic publishing company, and I was a graphic novelist. I wrote and did a lot of editing and work for graphic novels. And I needed to write one I didn't need to. I was writing a story that involved humans and dinosaurs living at the same time. Mm-hmm. Now, I was a young Earth creationist, and in my head, that's a totally feasible why not thing.
Right.
Like the dinosaur, that could have happened. But my work has never been for a Christian audience, even when I was a Christian. So I was like, well, I need to throw in some secular ideas here about dinosaurs so that this doesn't ring like it's a Ken Ham pamphlet, right?
Right.
So I started looking at some of the arguments about, well, how long ago did they live? And I wanted to have those details in, and which dinosaurs might have evolved to which modern creatures. I just didn't even know what they said about that.
Right.
Well, as I was doing that, I'm like, well, man, some of this stuff makes kind of sense, right?
Right.
So,
but it's something that you would have before that just sort of considered just abjectly false.
Right. Because unfortunately, the kind of Christianity I had was very top-down authority.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so I was in the Christian Missionary Alliance after I was a Mennonite, and it's a very top-down denomination.
Mm-hmm.
It's whoever's at the top is correct, and whoever's at the second top is second most correct. And I learned things on authority. I accepted the Bible on authority, just authority. And the part about that, which is unfortunate, is that it gave me an excuse not to study these things, right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, these people have studied it all their lives, so I don't need to waste my time. I can work on my career and work on my family. And frankly, my youth ministry and my music ministry were all like, those were more important than studying.
That was similar for me. I grew up in a very charismatic evangelical environment, huge emphasis on the Holy Spirit, and sort of scholarly work just seemed like, I mean, honestly, no one taught me this, but the impression that I had was like scholarly work is done now. That was done a long time ago. It's just the truth. And, all these people out there that don't believe it, they're just living an absolute lie influenced by the enemy. And so we don't have to worry about any of that. That's in the past. We know the truth. Let's go about our lives and our culture. And that was what I was in.
I'm totally with you. Like, it would have been just more trivia to know if I'd have looked into it.
Yeah, for Tuesday night trivia night.
Yeah. But so when that graphic novel had been published and I'd kind of had a hiatus between projects, I was like, you know what? I should really go and find what the best young Earth creationist arguments are, just so that I know them, right? Because it's niggling in my brain.
Yeah.
So who's the best? Okay, well, Ken Ham is the most popular. Going back to this, is popular correct? He's the most popular, so I'll order all his books. I ordered his answers books, and as I'm reading them, I'm like, oh no, these answers are terrible. I agreed with him. I agreed with his conclusions, but I'm like, if this is how you connected the dots, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So then it was like, okay, maybe I should go research what do the best evolutionists, and I know that's a weird word, but as a Christian, you think that's a word.
Yeah.
Evolution. What do evolutionists think? And I start reading up on that. And then I eventually came to this place where I'm like, oh shoot, at least some parts of evolution are correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
So everyone who's told me that was ridiculous also told me other things were ridiculous. So a lot of people like to think, oh, you stopped believing in young Earth and you became an atheist. No. It was just that, okay, now I can't accept everything on authority the way I did because they were wrong. I don't know about you. The kind of inerrancy I believed in was it's either 99% is too low. It had to be, the Bible had to be 100% inerrant. And 99% meant it's all garbage.
Oh yeah, so, definitely. It was the unquestionable authority of Scripture. It was beyond question for certain. Yeah, and same as you. It's like the Bible actually was a big piece of the puzzle for me when I remember turning the switch where I was like, the Bible can't be the perfect word of God. It still at that point meant a lot to me. And actually, it still does in a totally different way now. But at that point, it was still like, I'm still willing to admit that it's inspired and that God exists and all of it's all connected. But I remember flipping that switch and being like, yeah, the Bible is human, and there's things in it that are not correct.
Absolutely.
And it started with not correct, and then it went, well, if there's things that are not correct, are there like things that it depicts that didn't even happen? And how do we know? How do we know that we can trust all of these stories and the details in them? And you get on your channel incredibly into the details with so much knowledge. And I've actually, in my sort of last year or two of going through this process, I've learned a lot from your videos. Because when I have questions about a specific issue, I go, okay, I want to hear from Sean McDowell. and then I want to hear from Paulogia, and see which one feels like I could believe it. So I really appreciate your approach on that. So you started to have questions about young Earth creationism and evolution, and that was your entry point to this.
Right.
This process that we sometimes now refer to as deconstruction. I'm sure during that time we didn't have that word. I didn't have the word.
I didn't.
Yeah.
I never heard the word till later. Yeah.
But what came next for you after that?
So after that was it was why I kind of threw up this Ken Ham versus William Lane Craig thing, because William Lane Craig, William Lane Craig accepts all the science, but then just decided that, well, he's going to interpret the Bible in such a way that it's so loose that all of that science is fine. And for better or worse, I'm like, well, I think you're bending the scripture farther than it was intended.
Yeah.
Versus Ken Ham, who I think the Bible is completely rigid, but so therefore I'm going to throw out everything that contradicts it or even appears to contradict it. And I think for me, the intellectual honesty was, well, neither of these positions is tenable.
Right. So what's the truth?
So the truth, I think, comes down to the fact that, it's not up to us to interpret this liberally or conservatively. It's that, this is actually a flawed book that could get things wrong. Mm-hmm. And once you open that door, that crack of a door where it's like, it might not be that I have to interpret it crazily or throw out science. Maybe it's just wrong.
Yeah.
And as soon as you let that thought, you probably remember, that thought was a week of then me praying and being on my knees and crying about wait, could it be wrong? But then I slowly got more accustomed to, okay, let's examine this as if I'm not assuming that it's true. So then you start learning that, the gospel manuscripts aren't as great as we think. And that actually we don't really have great reasons other than tradition to know who wrote them. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, wait, the real scholars, the people I studied under, I went and talked to some of my Bible school professors. I'm like, did you know that Paul maybe only 7 of those books? I'm like, yeah, we knew that.
Yes.
I'm like, why didn't you tell us in class?
Yeah. Did you know that the ending in Mark was probably added later?
Yeah.
The story in John.
Oh yeah, we knew that.
Yeah, the story in John of the woman caught in adultery, that story was most likely added later because it's not in any of the earliest manuscripts. I started learning those same things, and I was like, whoa. Are you telling me you guys knew about this stuff this whole time?
Right. And I felt very betrayed. I don't know about you.
Yeah, well, I just felt I guess on one hand, I kind of get why you wouldn't want to advertise that, but doesn't that knowing that stuff? Here's where I landed on this particular issue, and it's a real burner for me. It gets me, is that when you're engaging with someone who's studied this stuff, who's a Christian, they generally are willing to admit, oh yeah, you know what? Yeah, what we're doing is we're trying to do the best we can with what we have, the manuscripts that we have, the information that we have. And my belief, this is what they'll say, my belief in God, in Yahweh, in Jesus, in the virgin birth, in the resurrection, in the resurrection appearances, my belief in all those things is based on the fact that it seems to me to be the best interpretation of what I see, which is a fairly humble claim, right?
Right.
So then when you're having a conversation like that, there's all this nuance and all this subjectivity and wiggle room and humility. And then 20 minutes later, in a totally different context, they'll be talking about God and Christianity with capital T truth. Our culture in America, or North America in our case, is it's getting worse all the time because we've given up on truth, capital T truth. And I'm just like, whoa. What happened to all that humility, that wiggle room, that subjectivity? It's gone as soon as you're having conversations about culture or how we apply things in our lives. And that's one of my biggest beefs.
Yeah, like you, I don't know how long you went to church after you started having doubts, but I went to church for a good 6-7 months after still having doubts, and it was very difficult to sit in the pew
Yeah.
and not yell back, like not wait, that's not what you said, and that's So I'm with you on all that.
Yeah. So you started taking these things apart, and you spent a week praying about it when you had that realization about the Bible.
Yeah, and then absolutely, and people like to talk about how they use the royal you, right? They
Yes.
a lot of say, well, atheists leave Christianity because you want to go sin or because you haven't read enough books.
Yeah, that's both. Those are both tropes that I've talked about a lot. Yeah.
And I did nothing but order Christian books.
Mm-hmm.
I was just reading everything I could to try to hold on because it was my whole life. Everyone in my family is a Christian. All of my business partners are Christians. My whole social circle are all Christians. Like the cost of leaving was so high, and all that I was promised on the other side was intellectual honesty, which is like, well, okay, great. What does that get me?
Yeah.
So no, like I desperately tried to claim, and you probably feel the same way. And I remember like my last prayer running on a treadmill. It's like, come on, like just show me, give me something. I'm willing to be even. Okay, fine. The Bible's not true and whatever, but are you there, God?
Yeah.
And it's like, because I was no longer convinced, from the Bible any longer. So, and this all those tropes about why people leave Christianity, I'm sure there's people who are non-Christians for terrible reasons. Yeah, I'm guessing there's lots, but there's also there's no gatekeeper on if you're a Christian for terrible reasons.
That's true.
And that was one of the things I looked around and as my pew, I'm like, as I was losing my faith, I'm like, well, you haven't studied anything and you haven't studied. Maybe it was me being judgy, but I was looking around the congregation. And I'm like, you couldn't even name the books in the New Testament, and you're like going to heaven and you're going to heaven, but I'm not. And I've, just now spent 6 months to a year spending almost all my time trying to figure out if this is true. So yeah, those are frustrating things for some of us who leave. And I don't remember what the original question was.
No, it doesn't matter.
Angry.
That's
Canadian angry, by the
way. Canadians do get angry, contrary to popular belief. It's just they'll smile at you while they do it. Oh yeah, they'll call you bud. They'll be like,
a Canadian version of bless your heart.
Okay,
but I don't,
bud.
Yeah.
Okay, bud. Sometimes when I go back home to Canada, I sort of pretend to put on a Canadian accent because my Canadian accent's pretty gone at this point.
Right.
But I'll sort of joke around about it. I'll sort of joke around about it, right? And put on this kind of an accent, right? And
so
about
you had a Letterkenny Ontario accent.
Oh wow, good call.
Yeah.
Rural Ontario is where my family
BC
is.
accent's a little different.
Yeah, I never had that. No. I grew up in rural Ontario, so you pegged me. But about day 3, usually visiting my family, the accent starts to not be a joke anymore. And it like settles, and all of a sudden I'm really speaking like that. And it's the weirdest thing. I don't know if you had this experience going back between Canada and the US. It's the weirdest thing going home to where you grew up and discovering that they all have accents that you never noticed.
Yes.
It's like
very strange.
What is this? But
and especially the Bay Area is so maybe it's because I live there, but I feel like the Bay Area is so non-regional dialectic.
Yep. It's like an Anchorman. I'm practicing my non-regional diction.
Right, exactly. So any other parts of Canada, it's pretty startling.
Well, so you started, you're still going to church. You started doing research. It sounds like you had a season a lot like mine. I'm even using some Christianese here by saying season.
I understand.
Some of it's hard to drop. It sounds like we had a similar season where we're just sort of obsessively reading. My wife and I had just had our first kid. So we had a baby who was doing night feedings, and I would get up and do the 4 a.m. night feeding, and then I would just stay up, and I would read, all kinds of stuff. and it was absolutely an obsession for me for probably 2 years, because I was like, there just kept being more, right?
Right.
Like the more I looked, the more I'm like, there's more and more and more. And oh, I didn't know about this, and I didn't know about this. I mean, did you have was that your experience too?
Absolutely. Yeah. Because all I just wanted this general answer about evolution. And then I got into like, now I'm trying to figure out, was the Pentateuch edited? Was it from 4 documents or 10 documents?
That's really,
and no one's even debating what, like, I didn't even know 6 months ago that it had been edited. I thought Moses wrote it all, from his own hand.
Right. Did you,
no. So
did you
then
start
all of a sudden
focused on New Testament and then sort of end up looking at more Old Testament afterwards?
Yeah, my youth ministry was involved with memorization of the New Testament with teens, and so the New Testament I knew much better than the Old Testament at that point. So yeah, you start there, but even when you go back and like you start to wait, someone dates this prophecy after the event that had happened. I didn't even know that was a thing that could be.
Yeah,
and then it's sort of alluding to further. It's like, how many books have you read to be this gatekeeper about whether you can leave Christianity or not?
Right.
All of a sudden, it's like, well, now I have to. So there was a particular family member in mind that I had in my head. Well, if I'm going to leave, I'm going to have to face this particular family member.
Yeah.
And they have every answer.
Yeah.
So now I have to study enough to even, like, it was funny now, but at the time I'm like, well, if I'm even going to leave, I know I'm going to have this debate to get out the door.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then I had to, like you, then it became spiraling. It's like there's no rabbit trail that was not worthy of attention.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
For a lot of the people that are going to be listening to this, there's a lot of people in various stages of quote unquote deconstruction, or sort of re-examining their faith and why they believe what they believe. And I've noticed that talking about specific, biblical things that jumped out at us is something that people really appreciate. Were there like a couple of specific biblical issues that were like linchpins for you? Because there were a couple for me, which I could share, but I would love to hear if there was something.
Sure, we can maybe bounce both of ours. So I mean, one of my early ones was that I really felt that Jesus believed in historical Adam.
Yeah.
That Jesus believed in historical Adam. So actually, to me, almost I could buy all the Peter Enns takes and all those kind of things, that it's all allegory, and that's fine. But it sure seemed like Jesus believed it.
That's
that was
interesting.
An early one.
That one, I haven't looked at that one specifically. What were you looking at when you were thinking about that particular issue?
Again, that was when I was really holding on to young Earth creationism,
right,
and whether or not And I had already come to the sense that no, there is common descent. Like we had a common ancestor with apes for sure.
Oh yeah.
But in my head, I was like, well, okay, I can maybe say that, okay, God guided this, and God gave hominids a soul at a certain point, but we had common ancestors. But there's a lot of theories. Josh Swamidass and like a lot of these guys have theories along those lines, and that's fine. But man, it sure, and that's part of my video this morning. It sure seems like Jesus believed it. So That was an early one. And then another one, which has now become kind of this weird thing that I'm almost known for now, is this whole. I sure thought it was a good argument that the apostles wouldn't have died for this.
Yes.
Because they knew it was. They personally were the guarantors to know it was true. They were eyewitnesses.
Yes.
And then that was just a huge one for me.
Yeah.
In investigating. Okay, first of all, you're saying that because they were eyewitnesses and they were martyred, they are guarantors. Okay. Did they die? Like, we'll walk backwards. Do we know that they were martyrs? No.
Yeah.
Like, we sure don't. And I've been criticized of late of de-emphasizing Sean McDowell's case. So let me give him the strong version.
Sure.
He thinks there's 6 that he categorizes more probable than not. Yeah. And even some of those aren't disciples. Some of those aren't the 12. But he says there's 6. But fine. Okay, there's 6. I don't happen to agree that there's a great historical case for those, but even so, then it's not like, well, it's not all of them.
Yeah. Let's for the audience real quick, let's just define what the argument is. So the argument is, and you and I are both very familiar with this argument. The argument is that, well, maybe I'll let you define the argument. Would you mind doing that?
Sure. Yeah. The argument that I would have used to make
is
that, even though we have people who might fly a plane into a building on 9/11, those people are dying for what they believe. However, the earliest apostles died terrible deaths for what they witnessed personally firsthand. So because they witnessed it and could have then recanted and got out of their death, but didn't, chose to die instead, we can be very confident that they were telling us the truth.
Right. That they were sincere.
Would you agree
in their
that
belief.
that's
That's
roughly the argument?
Yeah, I think that it's basically that there are people that believe they saw the resurrected Jesus separately from whether they did or not.
Correct.
They believed that they did, such that they were sincere in their belief, as evidenced by their willingness to die for that belief. Is more or less the argument that I've heard. Yeah. And I, like you, for a while I was like, well, that's compelling, because in my head, what's not said in that argument but implied is hundreds of people saw Jesus resurrected. Right? And they were all, like, what your brain imagines is hundreds of people saw the resurrected Jesus, and then not a gun because they didn't have guns, but I don't know, like a sword was put to their throat and they said, do you believe in Jesus? And, and they said, yes, I believe in Jesus. I saw him resurrected, martyred. Like, that's what I imagined in my head. But like, when you go and
total side question here. Did you ever do that stupid, I don't want to call it stupid. Did you ever do that youth activity where literally like someone would get on the bus with a bunch of youth group kids, like with guns?
What?
To try to, okay. So you didn't. Okay. Fine.
That's horrifying. Did you ever experience that?
No, but I knew youth groups that did that, and are because that was always the scare, right? Are you willing to die for Jesus today? And so I was aware. I was a Mennonite, so we like don't touch guns.
Yeah.
But I was aware of other youth groups where they literally would have people come on with fake guns onto the bus to try to give them a few minutes of scaring, like, I'm going to shoot anyone who doesn't.
Yeah,
believe in Jesus.
I mean,
I'm aware of things like that happening.
I didn't experience that, but I remember I have been in situations where I could see that happening. Yeah.
Anyway, that's a tangent. Let's go back to
that's a tangent, but just to put a point on that, like, that's abuse.
I agree.
Like, and I've in the past been hesitant to use that word, but I'm seeing more and more situations in religious organizations, not just Christian, where I'm more and more looking at it and going like, no, that's abuse.
But is it not also abuse when we do our youth ministry, we take them away from their parents for a weekend, so they're in an unfamiliar environment. We keep them up crazy late. We have an 11 p.m. Worship service. We order the songs because we know the order of emotions we want. We've given them sugar all day, not proper nutrition. And then at midnight, when we do the altar call, how do they not?
Yeah.
There's a spectrum there of things that I feel complicit in that I did.
It's wildly manipulative. Yeah. And when you're in it on both sides, like in both the youth experiencing it and the people putting it on, there's a feeling of righteousness about it.
Of course.
And so it's not, it's not that the leaders are like setting out to consciously manipulate, but it's like, it's the whole ideology. Yeah. Okay.
Anyway,
we got on a tangent.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're talking about this martyrdom argument. So I think we've established what the argument is. I always, because I think what happens in people's brains, people's minds, when they hear that argument is they fill in the blanks with all this really compelling stuff, right?
Yep.
Like, oh, all these people were martyred. Yeah, of course they wouldn't have, if they knew it was a lie, they would have just said, I'm just kidding. Not serious. Yep. But, it does make sense that their willingness to die would be an indicator that they're sincere. But when you actually look at, well, how many people were actually killed for sure? Do we know that they were given the opportunity to recant? I mean, we also know that Rome occupied Israel and Judea. So it's like, there's a lot of political stuff going on. And of course,
Absolutely.
Rome had political motivations for killing people that they saw as a threat.
Well, or Nero, for example,
Yeah.
in 64 AD, who literally was just looking for he set the city, if we believe Tacitus,
Yep.
that he set his own city on fire
And blame the
and needed to
Christians.
blame somebody. And so, oh, well, I'll blame those people. Well, those people weren't okay, they were killed because they were Christians, but Nero didn't care what they believed. He didn't have some nuance of theology that was like the difference here. And theoretically, that's where both Paul and Peter were killed.
Yeah.
Was under Nero's, persecution. So like in my head, it was like, oh, can I really count that as a martyrdom when it was like some guy with a political vendetta?
Yeah. And when you whittle it down, I mean, like I interrupted you when you were getting to this point. There's actually only a very small handful of people that we even have partial evidence of anything resembling
Right.
martyrdom.
Right. And so we'll go with Sean's big number of 6.
Yeah. Yeah. And 6 includes Paul. And
Right.
Paul's, I think, one of the ones that's better established, right?
Paul is the most well attested.
Yeah.
He's the only one who we have firsthand saying, I saw risen Jesus.
Right.
But yet he saw, depending on how you deal with theology, either Jesus came back a second time to see him.
I was going to bring that up. So that's...
Or he saw some other form that the others didn't see.
Yeah. Because Paul's experience was much later than all the others.
Correct. Years later, after the ascension.
Yeah, that was the other thing.
Yeah.
I've brought that up to an apologist friend before. Like, hey, under the category of things I didn't realize when I was a believer,
Right.
Paul's experience was like way later, after the ascension, after he apparently rose into heaven, even though we know that like heaven isn't like like actually physically up. So that's a whole other thing. But like, what did, if Paul feels like he experienced the resurrected Jesus and the ascension was before that, did Jesus like come back down? And where was Jesus in the interim? And was he like in orbit? And my apologist friend was like, oh no, Jesus was in heaven. And I was like, so he was reincarnated. He was like incarnated again? Because that's like...
Did they keep the body around on storage?
Yeah, it's like, it's one of those questions that you just, if you're a believer, you don't think about it because it doesn't seem important. But
Right.
as soon as you start asking questions, it's like things get weird fast.
And I don't care a lot about Bible contradictions. I don't think that's as good an argument as many secular people think it is. But the fact is, when every time Paul's vision is described, it's different. So one time they can hear him but not see him.
Yeah.
And one time they can see him but not hear him.
Yeah.
And then others, it's just this big light that blinded him. I'm like, man, these sure sound like visions.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
So this martyrdom or argument, that's become a thing that like people have associated with you on some level now.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think I'm not aware of other YouTube, people on the YouTube platform who were like deep diving into that particular argument. And I spent a bunch of time looking at each of the 12.
Yeah.
Like, what do people think Bartholomew did, and what do people think like the side ones,
Yeah.
right? Because what frustrates me, and you alluded to it, was that you fill in the blanks, and so they deliberately use the word apostle,
Right, which can be misleading. Because I've asked apologists, what does the word apostle mean to you? And
Right.
the answer I typically get is, well, it's not always the same, but the one that seems the most consistent is people who had experiences with the resurrected Jesus. Is that your understanding of the word, or?
Well, that's the earliest use of it.
Oh, okay.
But by the time the church fathers were using it, so and even partway through, I think it's in chapter. There's a mark, and I'm going to get this wrong, so apologize to them on live. But somewhere around chapter 12, they start using it to mean people who were sent out.
Okay, yeah,
So it shifted in meaning from the closest group. So including like when they replaced when Matthias stepped in for Judas,
Right.
for example, in chapter 4, they're still using apostle, meaning a witness. But at some point, the church started using it just to mean people who are sent.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you are willing to conflate those things, so when you quote Clement or Polycarp or some of these early church fathers, when they say apostles,
Yeah.
they are using it in that people who are sent sense.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Yeah, that does make sense. So yeah, so do you feel like the usage of the term apostle is helpfully vague for
I do believe it is.
Yeah.
It's one of those nice conflations, which happens a lot in the arguments for God. It seems like there's sometimes words are used in multiple ways within the same argument.
Yeah.
If you're not watching for it,
Yeah.
problem. So that's why I specifically want to, when I talk to anyone about it, I want to, well, let's talk about the names of the people. Like, can you give me the names of the people you're talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Because yes, this general, and because they like to include the 500, right? So famously in 1 Corinthians 15 at the start, that there's this story that 500 people saw Jesus. But we don't know anything more, we don't even know where this was or any of this. But if you're willing to add that 500 into your count in your head, if you just accept the story at its word, well, yeah, this is a lot of people who saw Jesus who were dying, but we don't know that the story is accurate. We don't know what their names are. We don't know what they were out preaching. We don't know how they died. So
yeah,
what do we know?
I've heard the argument with regards to the 500. I've heard the argument that it was something that people could go and verify at the time, go and talk to those 500 people. That was the context of the verse. Like, go and talk to them, because it says some of them are asleep and some of them it basically infers some of them are still living. You could go talk to them but you're right, that 500, that reference to 500 only appears in one place. It's not corroborated anywhere else, inside or outside of the Bible.
Correct.
And there's no names given. And some of the details of this actually are present in my mind, because I just watched one of your videos that talks about it. So, I mean, for anyone curious about this stuff, we're dancing around so many different issues here, but Paul has very detailed and thoughtful videos about, I mean, so many of these things we've talked about here. So, like, I would just encourage people to go and do a deep dive on your channel, because I mean, you can spend some time and you are very gracious to be concise about things, like we've talked about.
And I would just say, after you watch my video, if you want the primer, don't take my word for it, please, because I rejected authority as a Christian. So I don't ever want anyone to go out and say, well, because Paulogia said, that there's this about the 500, please go read the passage yourself. Please go. If you think this is a compelling argument, one side or the other, please read both sides, because my video can give you a 20-minute version of the short, high level of both sides of the point. But I just don't want to be cited as an authority.
Sure.
And
well, and that's one of the things. Another thing that I appreciate about your work is that you're constantly saying, like, hey, here's some things you can go check out, read them for yourself. I don't ever get the sense that you have any desire for people to be like, oh, well, I believe this because, Paulogia tells me so.
Yeah, no, right. Oh, they hate that when I play that.
Oh, anyway, for the Bible tells me so?
For the Bible tells me so. And I'm like, it's your song. I didn't write the song.
I know. I literally was like, maybe I can get that graphic for this episode and put it in for myself. But so you really, was there a moment for you, because there was for me, where you were like, oh shit, I don't think God is real? Was there did you have like a moment?
I did. And it was weirdly tied with the word atheist, which I know I've mentioned that I don't love talking about this word, but I was watching. Joshua Fierstein, I don't know if you remember that name.
I don't know.
He was a popular YouTube youth pastor.
Okay.
And he was doing this $100,000 challenge about whether, God could exist or not. And he had drawn this big circle of, here's the knowledge of the whole, the knowledge of all the world. And here's what we know is a dot. And is it possible that God is in here?
Huh.
And I was just kind of like, no.
Wow.
Not the Christian God. Not the Christian God. Like, I mean, so I hold open that perhaps there are gods who have not yet been described to me.
Yeah.
That could potentially be exist. For like a god who kicked things off and doesn't care to interact with us.
Yeah,
How could I possibly check that?
Deism, essentially.
So, right.
Yeah.
Essentially, like, I couldn't argue against deism. I don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
But the Christian God, when we're talking specifically about the one I believed in, Joshua did this. I'm like, no, that was the moment to myself where I realized, oh, I don't think so. And that was so what was your moment?
My moment was, it's funny. It wasn't on any specific issue. I was doing one of those 4 a.m. sort of wake up, feed my son, sitting down, reading. And I'm trying to remember what I was studying. I honestly don't remember what I was studying, but I was in one of those seasons again, where I was just like absolutely consuming all these different ideas, and including I was doing a lot of research from listening to Christians and reading Christian apologetics books. And I didn't find the apologetics books as convincing as some of the other books I was reading. Oh, I remember what it was. I was reading Sapiens.
Oh yeah, that's a good book.
I'm trying to remember the name of the author. It's a name that's not easy for me to remember.
And I met him at Faithless Forum, and I'm going to forget. But anyway,
it's a 3-word.
We'll put the graphic
name.
up.
Yeah,
now.
I'll put a graphic up, and there will be a link to Sapiens below, and it's basically sort of the story of humanity. And I was reading Sapiens, and it made sense of so many things. And I was like, well, yeah, this is definitely who we are as human beings. And it sunk in, and I was like, oh, I don't think God is real. And it wasn't a welcome thought for me. Like, I was not pumped about it. I think that's another misconception, is that people, like, they stop believing in God and they're stoked, you know? For people whose lives are ensconced in Christianity, like, it breaks, everything. It breaks the way you see the world. It breaks the way you see yourself. It's a terrifying realization, but like you, it was like, am I going to be honest with myself, or am I not?
Yep.
And if I was going to be honest with myself, I was like, I don't. And I think the phrasing I used at the time was, I don't believe in God. Now, the phrasing I use is more that I look back at that moment and I go like, well, I had an image of God, and I definitely do not believe in that image of God anymore.
Right. Like
you, I'm retaining an openness. I don't know what to exactly. I do have this sense that there's goodness in the world, and I'm curious about it. And, you know, this cycle of creation and destruction and joy and sorrow. And I've also been very interested in psychology, and I find certain ideas in psychology that remind me of spirituality, from studying Freud and Jung. Specifically, I've kind of gone like, there's some stuff about us as human beings that is psychological. It's definitely centered in our brains, but sometimes spiritual language gets at it the most for me. But it's very mysterious. So I'm in this place where, like, I don't believe in God the way that I did. I would also say that the same as you, I don't believe in the God of Christianity, but I'm curious if there's something about us as human beings that borders on the spiritual in a sort of a psychological way. And I wonder if many religions have been trying to touch on it and doing so in a very human, haphazard sort of way. You know,
right.
Do you ever wonder stuff like that, or does that sort
Not
of
really.
go outside
I
your
went,
realm of interest?
I've been accused of this, of being a very black and white thinker, and perhaps that's where I am. But once I decided that, for example, like, you seem to accept materialism in general,
I do. Yes. I should clarify. And I mentioned this in a text to you earlier today, that I sort of see things in two buckets. I see, like, factually true or untrue insofar as we can, you know, if you get into Cartesian skepticism, you start to doubt absolutely everything. But insofar as we can, like, live our lives. Right.
But my definition of truth, which you probably, you know, whatever conforts to reality, as adjudicated by predictive power.
Okay, yes, that's a great definition. I'm going to, I shall take it.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so bucket one for me is like things that I can be reasonably sure of empirically, scientifically, measurably, verifiably, predictably, like you said.
Yep.
Bucket two is sort of this bucket of like things I'm curious about that I can't verify, I don't know for sure, but my sense of curiosity and also I've worked in a creative field my whole life. So I do feel like there's this aspect of woo woo. Like every time I write a song, I'm like, am I writing a song or did I just discover it somehow? Okay. So like, I know that's, but I see that in sort of a separate realm of thinking.
Right. Where I have gone entirely the other way. And it's like, if it's not in the first bucket, I don't think there's any good way for me to test it or know it. So I'm not going to spend any of my time thinking about it.
Well, and that's perfectly reasonable to me. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just realizing now I've weirdly become what I hated. So part of my background is that when I lived in California, I worked for George Lucas.
Oh,
he was my boss.
No way.
And I worked on Star Wars, the prequels.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
We're getting to this now? I don't
know.
After an hour of talking, I did not know this about you.
I got my Skywalker sound mug going. Yeah. But anyway, I'm laughing because I'm going to hate because if everyone remembers, we went 30 years of the Force, right? George had the Force.
Yeah.
And I loved Star Wars so much. And that was a big bone of contention in my Christian community because that's all new age and woo and whatever. Anyway, and I got to Lucasfilm and we worked on, we introduced midichlorians. I didn't introduce midichlorians. It's not my fault.
Yeah, don't midichlorians are my fault, guys.
But everyone was so mad that they introduced midichlorians, right? This scientific explanation for the Force, and it wiped away all the woo and whatever you wanted to make it.
It demystified the Force, yeah.
Right. And now I'm just, as we're having this conversation, I realized, oh, wait, I've become that guy who's like, no, I don't, unless you tell me there's a midichlorian count to deal with it, I don't care.
Well, let me speak to that. I think people hated, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know. I think people were frustrated about the midichlorian thing because it demystified something that was more fun to be mystical.
Right.
It was like,
and that's what I think when you talk about bucket two, that's what happens in my head. It's like you're having more fun in your life.
Yes.
Allowing more possibilities and attributing things potentially to things that you couldn't justify, but it's fun that way.
And I'm totally comfortable with someone who's much more empirically minded, looking at all of that bucket two stuff and being like, yeah, that's all made up and not real. And I'm perfectly comfortable with it. My one asterisk that I will put on anything in bucket two is that it has to be good for me and good for my family and good for my community and good for humanity. It's like
and cause no harm.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean by good. Yeah. Like it has to cause no harm. So I'm deep in the doctrine of ahimsa, which is this Eastern idea of nonviolence and non-harm. And because, and this is something that we could talk about for a moment too, that do you think that bucket two, like in my framework of bucket one, bucket two here, do you think that bucket two ideas are sort of inherently like not a good idea? Because they could so easily be misconstrued as bucket one ideas or not helpful in general? This isn't a gotcha. It's a genuine. I'm curious.
No, it's an interesting question. So I just wouldn't put them forth as true. So I am obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously, but if you watch my YouTube channel, most people agree that I have some level of, I have right brain and left brain needs. I have creative needs and I have logical needs. And I hand draw my cartoons and I do these kind of things. And those, I understand. I like to do photography. I like to walk in nature. Like I get beauty and I get why that is a value to my life, but I don't, I no longer think that those are relevant truth claims.
Right. Like so you view that as a totally different domain.
Yeah. It's a domain of, it goes in that domain
of aesthetics.
If you don't believe in God, what's the point of having a life? And it's like, well, because I personally enjoy these things and maybe even I should, like maybe under some idea of should or shouldn't, maybe I shouldn't even enjoy some of the things I enjoy or whatever. But just my personal makeup is that I enjoy Star Wars and the Marvel universe, and
me too.
and I enjoy, hikes. I enjoy mountains and I enjoy the ocean, but that doesn't, I don't describe it then some transcendent meaning.
Yep.
Right. That's not, I kind of reject this idea that there are hard oughts and that there are hard soft truths, I guess. That's a weird phrase. I can't come up with a better one.
No, that's good.
So no, I don't think it's a waste, because I do think that is the whole bucket of the things that when we are not looking to God to give us the meaning of our lives, I do think that beyond our just mere survival, that's the bucket of things that make life great, and that I'm excited that I have however many years I have.
Yeah.
So,
I had this thought that was really helpful, because when I let go of the idea of God and the sort of ideas of heaven and hell, I was sort of in a place where I was like, well, I guess when I die, the chances are I just sort of stop existing, right? I mean, I don't know that, but I don't know what happens when I die. But there's a real possibility that I just cease to be. And that was terrifying for me for a period of time. But one of the ways I sort of dug myself out of that terror is that I just discovered that eternity actually is terrifying. And no matter what you're doing for it. And I realized that, like, man, like, I only have so much time here. I don't know what happens when I die. And that makes every moment so precious and worth savoring. There's a psychological thing that I learned, that our minds imprint like fears and threats very quickly, but good things don't imprint in our memories unless we actively savor them for at least 15 seconds.
Interesting.
So it taught me to, like, savor things, and I was sort of like, every moment with my kids became more meaningful. Every moment with my wife it like took on this sort of beautiful, weighty significance, because it's like truly finite. And you mentioned Marvel Universe. There's this quote that I just absolutely love from the Age of Ultron, Avengers Age of Ultron. Mm-hmm. And it's Jarvis talking to the last iteration of Ultron. And Ultron says, "They're doomed, you know." And Jarvis says, "Yeah, I know. But a thing isn't beautiful because it lasts. It's a pleasure to be among them, even for a time." And, like, that helped me. I mean, did you experience anything along those lines?
No, absolutely. It was when I realized to myself that it's rare things that are the most valuable, and they are valuable because they are rare. So if life is eternal, then it is the least valuable thing that we could have. Yeah. Right? Time is the least valuable thing, when really I'm like you, and I alluded to it at one point. Like, at one point I had 4 weeks to live.
Yeah. So
and
you
when
saw
that
that.
Happens,
oh my gosh. Yeah. You saw
and
that.
that happens to you. Like, I walked outside and I'm like, well, I'm not mowing the lawn anymore. I just, like, it was just the thing I said out loud, right? It's like, why would I spend any of this time doing things that I don't like? And it became, it's a weird thing I don't talk about a lot, but it's this weird season of, like, every minute is so valuable. Yeah. And precisely because it will end, that it is valuable. And so I'm with you. Like, that takes a while to shift your head around.
It does.
But and part of what consoles me too is, like, people brought up to me, like, what was it like before you were born, Paul?
Yeah.
Like, well, nothing. And it's like, well, as best we can tell, that's what it's like after you're gone.
Right.
Like, we won't be aware. I will, if I'm right about whether there's a God, I will never know it.
Yeah.
Because I won't exist. So, no, I'm with you. Life is valuable because it is rare.
Yeah. And
the more rare something is, then, the more valuable.
Yeah.
Value take it. So
I feel like when I realized that, and I had the same realization as you. I don't remember where I heard that idea, but, like, did you mind not existing before you were born? And, like, No, I didn't mind it.
Right.
And I think for people that were counting on an eternity on some golden streets, that might not be a very comforting idea, but it's the one we've got. and so I also look at life that way. I'm like, this is the one we have. Let's make the most of it. Like, let's do good stuff. Let's have rich experiences and savor them. Let's try and leave things better than we found them. Let's be fully present in the experiences that we're having. And that's one of the things I noticed is that when I grew up being taught, like, no, you got to have a kingdom perspective, like eternal perspective. And I think what that sometimes does is it places people's gaze off into some future existence, and they're not present,
Right.
And you're missing out on what's happening here and now. And like what's happening here and now, right now, that's all that that's all that we have. It's all that exists.
And people ask why I do what I do. Like, what do you care if people believe? You stop believing. What do you care if people believe? Well, because I've seen it over and over and I lived it, that by holding to false ideas, you are necessarily then limiting the one and only life that we know we have.
Yes.
Maybe we have an afterlife. Great. Maybe we do. But we know we have this one. And if you are spending any of that time believing false things, whatever those false things may be, you are necessarily doing yourself harm in this precious life. So that's largely why I do what I do.
That's so good, Paul. I feel like it's like I need a replacement for amen, because that's an amen moment for me. But I feel like that's a perfect place for us to end this conversation. So, cool. Paul, thank you so much for sharing your perspective and your thoughts and a little bit about your life. I've loved your videos, and I'm loving now feeling like I get to know you on a bit more of a personal level. And I know anyone watching and listening to this is going to feel the same.
It's a pleasure. I've been also looking forward to chatting with you, and I can't wait for this to be the start of us chatting more.
I'm into it. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was my conversation with Paul. Thank you guys so much for listening and for watching. I hope you loved it. If you want to support Paul, honestly, the best things you can do are subscribe to his YouTube channel. He has a Patreon, so there will be a link in the show notes and the description for his Patreon. And just engage with Paul's content. And he's very active on Twitter, so you can check him out on Twitter as well. And if stuff that he makes has been meaningful for you, I encourage you to reach out and let him know. I know that he would appreciate hearing from you. Okay, so that's it for this week. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I hope to see you next week. Until then, stay curious.